The fog arrived before sunset. It rolled across Halcyon Point slowly, swallowing the harbor one section at a time. First, the fishing boats disappeared, then the loading cranes, then the far docks. By 6 in the evening, the Pacific Ocean no longer looked like water. It looked like absence. Dennis Rule stood beneath the leaking awning outside the ferry terminal, smoking his third cigarette of the shift. Rain tapped softly against the rusted roof above him. The sodium vapor lights over the parking lot buzzed with that low electrical hum old buildings make when they are too tired to fully stay alive. The terminal behind him smelled like mildew, wet concrete, burnt coffee, and machine oil. Nobody used the building anymore. Not really. The ferry routes had shut down years ago. Now the town only kept the terminal standing because nobody wanted to pay to tear it down. Dennis understood that feeling. Keeping dead things alive because dealing with the ending sounded harder. He flicked ash into the rain. Then he heard the noise. Metal, sharp, rhythmic, somewhere inside the terminal. Dennis frowned. Probably another loose vent panel. The building was full of dying noises. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped inside. The terminal corridors glowed dim orange beneath flickering ceiling lights. His boots echoed across wet concrete. The farther he walked, the colder the building became. Then he rounded the East Concourse corner and stopped. The dog was attacking the vending machine. A massive black Cane Corso stood on its hind legs beside the old departures board. Its front paws pressed against the machine. Its skull slammed into the glass. Again. Not wildly. Not like an animal panicking. Carefully. Methodically. The fluorescent light inside the machine flickered with every impact. Cracks spread slowly across the glass. The dog paused between strikes, as if listening, as if waiting for something. Dennis felt the hairs rise along his arms. The sound inside the empty concourse felt wrong. Too controlled. Too deliberate. The dog suddenly stopped. It lowered itself back onto all fours, then turned toward Dennis. Gray eyes. Cold. Human almost. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rainwater dripped somewhere deeper in the terminal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The dog stared at him, not threatening, not afraid, just watching. Then it walked away, slowly, disappearing into the loading bay corridor without making a sound. Dennis stood there for nearly a full minute. Then he stepped toward the machine. A diagonal crack stretched across the lower glass. Inside the machine, crushed beneath fallen candy bars, sat a faded sticker. 14. Dennis stared at it. He didn't know why, but something about the number bothered him. Outside, the foghorn sounded across the invisible harbor. One low, mournful note. Long, lonely. The town started talking about the dog after the second incident. At first, it was harmless gossip. Dock workers discussing the Black Harbor dog. Fishermen joking that it looked like something dragged out of hell itself. Tourists occasionally stopping to take photos before quickly, deciding maybe that was a bad idea. But Dennis noticed something strange. Nobody ever saw the dog eat. Nobody ever saw it bark. Nobody ever saw it sleep. The dog simply appeared, watching, waiting, then disappearing back into the fog. 3 weeks after the vending machine attack, Garrett called Dennis at home. Dennis, it's back. Dennis looked at the clock. 11:42 p.m. Rain hammered his kitchen window. Where? The employee lockers. Dennis arrived 10 minutes later. Garrett stood outside. The small locker building smoking, nervously beneath the awning. You hear it? Garrett whispered. Dennis did. Metal tearing. Inside, they stepped into the corridor. Locker number 4 had been peeled open like paper. The dog stood in front of it, breathing slowly, its nose pressed deep inside the torn metal gap, sniffing. Searching. Then suddenly it slammed its shoulder against the locker again. The sound echoed through the empty terminal. Garrett flinched. Jesus Christ. The dog froze, turned toward them. Its muzzle glistened with rainwater. Its chest rose slowly. Then once again, it simply walked away. Not running, not threatened, just finished. Dennis stared at locker 4. Empty. Dusty. Unused for years. Yet somehow the dog had chosen it specifically. That was the moment Dennis stopped thinking of the animal as random and started thinking of it as intentional. Marta Sheen arrived the next morning carrying coffee and exhaustion. She listened quietly while Dennis explained everything. Then she crouched beside the damaged locker. "You ever seen a dog act like this before?" Dennis asked. "No." She stood slowly. "But this isn't aggression." Dennis looked at her. "What is it then?" Marta stared at the twisted locker door. "Looks more like grief." That word stayed with Dennis all week. Grief, not rage, not madness. Grief. The dog moved like something grieving. That thought became worse 2 days later when Dennis dug through old terminal records and discovered Locker 4 used to belong to a ferry worker named Carl Prentice. Employment ended suddenly. Fall 2017. No forwarding address, no social records afterward. Like the man had vanished. Dennis brought the name to Paul Veitch. The retired harbor master sat near the terminal windows, sipping burnt vending machine coffee while watching fog drift over the water. "Carl Prentice?" Paul repeated, his face tightened. "Barely, but Dennis noticed. He left town," Paul said. "Why?" Paul shrugged. "People leave." Dennis watched him carefully. "Did he own a black Cane Corso?" A pause. "Tiny, almost invisible." "Then I wouldn't know." Dennis felt something cold settle quietly in his stomach. Paul wasn't surprised. He was cautious. There was a difference. The third incident happened at Slip 14, a fishing boat called the Mira K. Its side window had been shattered from the outside. When Dennis visited the dock, he found the owner, Ray Delacourt, replacing the broken glass. "You know the dog did this?" Dennis asked. Ray kept working. "Yeah." "You know why?" "Nope." Dennis looked at the slip number. 14. The sticker in the vending machine. Locker 4. Slip 14. Something was connecting. Something ugly. "Did you know Carl Prentice?" Dennis asked. Ray stopped moving just for a second, then continued tightening screws into the new glass. "Not really." "You're lying." Ray finally looked up. Rainwater slid from the edge of his cap. "Be careful what kind of story you build in your head," he said quietly. Then he walked away. That night, Dennis couldn't sleep. The rain hit his windows in long, slanted lines. The foghorn kept sounding somewhere out beyond the invisible harbor. He sat at his kitchen table reading old reports until 3 in the morning. Then he found it. Seat 14. An old archived ferry seating chart. The exact seat Nero destroyed days later inside the terminal waiting area. The dog had ripped the fiberglass chair directly from the floor, ignored every other seat. Only seat 14. Dennis stared at the number, then wrote one sentence in his notebook. "What happened in 2017? The answer arrived slowly, like rot beneath floorboards. Dennis discovered Carl Prentice. Once lived in apartment 14 at Harborview Apartments, and according to maintenance complaints, someone had repeatedly punched holes through the walls from inside the unit shortly before Carl disappeared. A month later, Nero appeared in town. The timeline fit too perfectly. Dennis drove to Harborview during heavy rain. The apartment manager showed him repaired drywall inside Unit 14. The damage looked violent, she admitted, like someone losing their mind. Dennis touched the patched wall. The room smelled faintly of old moisture and cheap paint. Then he noticed something near the baseboard. Deep claw scratches, low to the ground. A dog had been here, a very large dog. Dennis suddenly pictured Carl alone inside this apartment, breaking walls, unable to sleep. A massive black Cane Corso watching helplessly from the corner. And something about that image hurt more than Dennis expected. He found Ray Delacourt drinking alone at the Anchor Bar 3 nights later. Outside, rain hammered the harbor streets. Inside, old neon signs flickered against cigarette yellow walls. Dennis sat beside him. "You know what happened?" Dennis said. Ray kept staring at his beer. Long silence. Then finally, there was a night crossing. Dennis didn't interrupt. "Off the books," Ray continued quietly. "Illegal transport run." The bar lights buzzed overhead. "Human trafficking?" Ray swallowed. "Something like that." Dennis felt sick. There was a man on board. Mexican. Name might have been Marco Reyes. The rain outside intensified. One of the crew panicked. Fight started. "Somebody went overboard." Dennis stared at him. "Nobody reported it?" Ray laughed once. Short. Broken. The ferry was dying. The town was dying. Everyone was scared of losing jobs. His eyes finally lifted. "So they agreed nothing happened." Dennis felt cold spread through his chest. "Carl was there." Ray nodded. "He never recovered." "And the dog?" Ray looked toward the rain-streaked windows. "The dog stayed." Everything changed after that. Not externally. Halcyon Point still looked the same. Fog. Rain. Rust. Harbor lights glowing through mist. But Dennis started seeing the town differently. Every silence felt intentional. Every conversation felt rehearsed. People weren't forgetting. They were maintaining the forgetting, like workers repairing cracks in a collapsing wall. And Nero kept moving through the town like a living accusation, destroying objects connected to the night everyone buried. Not randomly, never randomly, searching, remembering, refusing to let go. Then came the storm, the worst storm of the winter. Wind screamed across the harbor hard enough to shake terminal windows. Rain moved sideways. The Pacific disappeared behind gray static. Dennis sat alone in the staff room, drinking burnt coffee when he saw the dog, standing outside in the flooded parking lot, perfectly still, water pouring off its massive body. The sodium vapor lights created glowing halos around the rain. Nero faced east, toward the invisible ocean, toward wherever Marco Reyes disappeared. Dennis watched through the window for a long time. Then the dog slowly turned, looked directly at him. Those pale gray eyes through rain and darkness and fog. Not angry, not threatening, just tired, deeply tired. Then Nero walked into the storm, toward the water, and disappeared. Dennis never saw him again. Spring arrived quietly. The fog lifted a little earlier each morning. Tourists returned. The terminal continued decaying in small, manageable ways. Marta officially closed the animal control file. Paul Veitch suffered a cardiac episode and moved into assisted care outside Tillamook. Ray Delacourt relocated his boat, and Halcyon Point continued surviving the same way it always had, by pretending. Dennis visited Paul once in the care facility. The old man looked smaller somehow, fragile, like guilt had finally started eating through him physically. For a long time, neither man spoke. Then Paul quietly said, "His name really was Marco Reyes." Dennis froze. Paul stared out the window. "We left him in the water." The room felt suddenly airless. "Nobody wanted trouble," Paul whispered. Dennis looked at the old man, really looked at him, and realized Paul had probably been drowning for 7 years. Not legally, emotionally. The way people drown while still breathing. That night, Dennis sat alone at his kitchen table. Rain tapped softly against the window. His composition notebook lay open. On the blank first page of a new notebook, he slowly wrote, "Marco Reyes, Guadalajara." Then he stopped. The kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator hum. Outside, somewhere beyond the fog, the Pacific moved endlessly against the harbor walls. Dennis stared at the page for a very long time, because now he understood something terrible. The dog hadn't been solving anything. Nero wasn't searching for justice. The dog had simply refused to forget. That was all. And somehow, that felt heavier. Dennis closed the notebook. Outside, the foghorn echoed once across the dark coast. Long, lonely. Then silence returned to Halcyon Point. The same silence the town had been protecting for years.